But I sat there and I watched her start to, give him the morphine. And he turned and he looked at my brother and I. And he said, "I'll see y'all soon." And he turned his head, and that was the last thing that he said consciously.
Welcome to Lost and Found, and on today's episode we have actor, writer, director Chad Darnell, and he talks about the loss of his father that happened not even a year ago and the 7 weeks leading up to it. Chad also talks about how some of his father's final last words have really helped him and motivated him through his grief. If I would have talked to someone like Chad early on in my grief, it would have made a world of difference. Just hearing how he moves through life with a loss and so shortly after is so inspirational and so motivating, and I really hope this helps you or someone you love. Thank you for watching. Chad, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
I'm so grateful to have you.
You're welcome.
So your father passed end of last year.
End of last year, yeah. Last year was the worst year of my entire life. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of things that happened earlier in the year with... It's 2023 should have been the best year of my life, because going into it, I was going to be directing a film. My other film was going to be coming out. That ended up not happening. Super long story short, I trusted someone who I should not have trusted. I would end up getting involved in a big piece with the Los Angeles Times. Those events started sending me into a very dark place early on in the spring. Work was starting to slow down because of the writer strikes. And so the writer strikes, they were impending, and then they happened. And when that happened, a lot of work shut down. There was also fear of the actors are going to strike too, so that we're not going to do anything else. So during that time, I was having to drive my car for Uber, was not making a lot of money. And also I'm watching all of the stuff that I had set up just go up in flames. I would end up casting a film in Savannah called Bride Hard. I was the very first casting director to have the SAG-AFTRA interim agreement. I'm having to educate people on my social media what that is, because I have people coming at me, calling me a scab. And they don't understand it's your union that's doing this. And that's how we get back to work. You never want to be the front page of Deadline Hollywood twice in one day. And then I ended up finding a job that I really, really wanted. And it was, if I had this job, I would have to quit acting. I'd have to quit writing it. But I would still be involved in film as executive director of the Savannah Film Office. And I for 7 months, I was gunning for every person, tourism, anybody in any sort of say. I was going and knocking on their door and begging them to say something. And I ended up getting cast in a play called Love, Valor, Compassion down in Fort Lauderdale. It was a really great experience. My car was destroyed in a drunk driving accident. So it's it was just one thing on top of the next. And again, unemployed, basically we're not working right now. Mm-hmm. I cannot afford a car payment right now. But I got to do this great play. We were supposed to extend a week. We ended up not extending because one of the other actors had a conflict. So we sold out every single performance. Great experience. As I'm driving back to Atlanta on a Tuesday morning, my mother calls me and tells me that my father's in the hospital. And he was in a hospital in Gwinnett. It was about an hour away from where I lived with traffic both ways. For 6.5, 7 weeks, I was back and forth to the hospital. I think my brother and my mother, early on, they had started to accept that this was the end. And I did not. I was bad cop the entire time. When the first day that I walked into the hospital, my father was a big man. And he was fighting with the big country, very simple man, born and raised in Sand Mountain, Alabama, and very country. And he was the kind of person that would always tease and harass waitresses, and they would just make you cringe at the table, but he thought he was being cute. And so these two nurses are trying to get him up, trying to get him to stand up and walk, and he's arguing with both of them. And I walked in and I was like, "Get the fuck up." And they both turned around and looked at me horrified. And my father goes, "And that's my other son," because my brother is a minister. So I was referred to as the actor the entire time that I was there. And so we were back and forth for 6.5 weeks. At one point, he went to a rehab place because they had done everything they could for him at the hospital. And until his health started to fail again, he would remain at the rehab. He was at rehab for about a little less than a week, and then he was sent back to the hospital. And that rehab place, God bless nurses and healthcare providers who are there, but it was just a horror house. I don't think he really ever saw these poor people that were just like left alone in wheelchairs at the front of the lobby, because that's their only interaction that they're going to get with people during the day. And it's like, I was like, God, he can't die here. And then he ended up getting moved back to the hospital. We started having the conversation about palliative care and hospice. At one point we were like, well, maybe we'll move him home for hospice. But then it was the conversation of, when he does pass, then he's passing here. And that's always going to be a thing. There was an alternate hospice care further up the road as well. And so the afternoon I had gone to tape an audition, met up with my family at the hospital. He's in the bed when we were beginning to have the conversation about palliative care. The administrator was having the conversation. She's telling us about everything. We're basically like exploring the option. Like, no one is seriously talking about, okay, well, let's do this. And at one point, a few hours later, a nurse came running back into the room, and she was like, oh, his blood pressure's dropping. And there was this high energy of like, sister, calm down. Like,
you were still there?
I was still there, yeah. And at that point, Andy and my aunt and uncle had gone back to the house. So it was just, no, that's not true. My mother was there. I don't think Andy was there. My aunt and uncle might have still been there. And from where I was sitting, I watched this nurse, and it's like, she's like rushing to the cart that has all the medication in it. I just walked over to her and said, what are you doing? And she said, well, his blood pressure's dropping. And I was like, it's probably going to drop. Like, that's how this happens. Like, calm down. And she said, well, we have to get his blood pressure back up. And I said, do we? Because we're having the conversation about hospice care right now. And so to which I meant, like, we are having the conversation, like, don't be rushing around doing this. But, you know, at the same time, and then the weirdest thing, she goes running, she goes, oh, I'm so sorry. And she rushes out of the room. She comes back with a doctor. He goes, oh, I understand that you've been having the hospice conversation. Are you ready to move forward with hospice care? And I'm like looking at everybody in the room, and I'm like, sweetie, we're just having a conversation here. Like, no one said kill daddy. And we're all just kind of stammering at that point. And the thing is, the patient has to be the one to say yes or no. And so the doctor asked, you know, my father goes, Mr. Darnell, is this what you want? I don't think any of us really at that point were like, is this what we want? I mean, like, we've just been having a conversation, and it's like, I feel like a message was miscommunicated. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it was like, somebody's going to have to make that decision in the next few days. And so he asked it 2 or 3 times. He goes, Mr. Darnell, is this what you want? And my father was looking at me the entire time. And I was like, oh God. And he just nodded, and he's like, I have to hear you say it. And he's like, yeah. So he had this nurse who was very sweet, and she came in, and they said something. He was like whispering in her ear, and she put her head down on his arm where his IV was, and she had like her forehead on it. And then she sat up, and she very dramatically pulled this, and I don't know what it was that she pulled, but she like yanked this thing. And it took my breath away when I saw it. And I was like, I'll be right back. And so I walked out of the room and went to the chapel, and I just cried for a half hour. It was, you know, and that's like at that point, the wheels are in motion. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, it got miscommunicated throughout the administration that we were moving him to hospice care. And so they're like, great, when is he going to be checking out of here? I'm like, he's not checking out. Like, and keep in mind, this is like 3 days before Christmas. So at that point, I go into the room, and I sat down, and I was like, again, bad cop. I sat down with this woman. God bless her. If you're out there, I'm so sorry for me. I sat down. I was like, this is what's going to happen. He's not leaving here. Are we clear? I said, if he makes it past Christmas, then we'll address it then. She goes, well, nobody's kicking your father out. I went, oh, I know nobody's kicking my father out. He's going to stay right where he is right now. Do you understand me? So at that point, all the wheels were in motion for hospice. And I knew that my grandfather, it took him several weeks to pass away when they did all of that stuff with him, that, you know, the removing of fluids and all that stuff. Nobody wanted him in pain, obviously. That afternoon, Andy had left, my aunt and uncle had left. It was just my mother and I in the room. And he just very insistently said, I want you to leave. I want you to go.
You?
Yeah. And I didn't know what he meant at that point. I was just like, well, I want to stay, because I didn't know if that was going to be, he's like, I want you to go. And I know in my heart of hearts, he was not saying, you're the guy that's trying to kill me, get out of my room. But it felt that way because he was looking at me when he said yes. So I left, but he was insistent he wanted me to leave. And I left. I went back the next morning. And for anybody who's gone through hospice, like, it's like, you never know. Like, you're going to go to bed that night and you don't know if you're going to wake up to the phone call or a text message. Like, he passed at 4:00 in the morning. Like, I always turn my ringer off. I've told everybody, I'm like, if you die in the middle of the night, I will find out when I wake up. So, I checked my phone. I got up to the hospital. Someone, not my mother or brother, had stayed overnight. And when I walked into the room, my father was moaning. And my first thought was, all right, Mr. Dramatic. But then I was like, wait, why is he moaning? He should be on morphine. I said, why is he? I said, are you in pain? And he's like, and so I said, and I looked at the other person. I said, why is he in pain? And the person said, he said he didn't want any medication. The blue rage that filled me in that moment, I turned around and I looked at my father. I said, I will be right back. And I walked into the hallway, and he had a nurse named Kipling. And she was at the end of the hallway. And I walked up, like, Kipling! And she comes running down. She knew exactly. And she's giggling as she's running towards me. And so I said, look at me. I'm the captain now. Here's what you're going to do. And she's like, and she already it was as if she knew that he needed this. And she's like, I understand. Like, she didn't even let me finish. But I was like, you're going to let me finish. I said, you're going to go get the morphine. You're going to get all the morphine. And you're going to go in. You're going to send him so high into morphine. And she's like, I understand. I said, I'm the captain now. My brother at one point walked up and he's like, what's going on? I said, get in the room. So when I walked into I was like, she ran and got the stuff. I was standing there for a moment. I was like, I realized it's like, I'm the one that you're going to want at end of life. So I walked into the room. She came in. In my head, this thing looks like a space needle from a sci-fi movie. In my head, it was so big. I know that's not what it was. But I sat there and I watched her start to, give him the morphine. And he turned and he looked at my brother and I. And he said, I'll see y'all soon. And he turned his head, and that was the last thing that he said consciously. And, however, several hours later, he was asleep, like out to the world. He wasn't snoring or anything, but he was out. He would never regain consciousness after that. But 3 hours later, my mother and I were sitting there. I was getting ready to leave. And out of nowhere, he screams, "Bam!" And it was... My father, like, over the past years, his voice had gotten really shallow. He, was very thin, like thin voice, like whispery. He screamed out with, like, the fervor of a 20-year-old, like, from the bottom of his diaphragm. It scared the shit out of my mother and I. And, like, we both jumped, and I was like... And we both looked at each other. I said, did he just say... Like, I was like, did he say damn? And then he goes, "Bam!" Like that. We both looked at each other and just started laughing. And I was also so unnerved that I had to get up and walk out of the room. Because Pam was my aunt who passed away the first week of COVID. She had taken her life. There were conversations that were happening within the family about my cousin's daughter who had been bullied, tormented by these kids. They were like, your grandmother's in hell now because she killed herself. And so for the fact that my father would see her, and my aunt, everybody loved her. She was like part of the football sponsors. Like, they called her the mayor of Crossville. She just had that personality. But she had, obviously, issues. And we all laughed at the funeral that it was like, if there was going to be one person that's elbowing everybody out of the way to greet my father into heaven, it would be her. And to get to hear that It was a gift. So that was a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday. Thursday, there was no change. He never came through. Friday morning, my mother and I were supposed to meet them at the hospital at 10 o'clock. And so I got a text message from her that morning, and she said, I'm afraid to call. And so I texted my uncle. I said, I'm on my way. What's going on? It's like, he's asleep. And so I said, okay, well, I'll be there shortly, and then I'll relieve you. Because he would do the night shift. I got up, got ready. I got in my car, and it was 10 o'clock. And I was like, how do I have missing time? I was missing 45 minutes. Unexplainable how I have this missing time. Because I texted, but I literally had lost 45 minutes of time. I mean, I even checked my phone. I was like, is the clock off? Like, how it's going to take me 45 minutes to get there. I texted everybody. I was like, I'm running late. Don't know what happened. I'm on my way. And so the entire way up there, I was like trying to find music. Like, you know, you do that thing. It's like you just hit random. It's like, I need a message. Give me a song. And nothing is coming. And then the last song that I, hit random for it was the Shania Twain song, Man, I Feel Like a Woman. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, and I turned it down. I called my mother and I was like, hey, I've decided this morning we should go make the funeral arrangements. And there was this weirdness in my mother's voice. And she goes, or we can do that tomorrow. I said, or we can do it today. It's like, it's going to be Christmas in 2 days. Like, we should just go ahead and do everything. And she said, well, where are you? And at that point, I was on 285, just getting ready to turn on to Peachtree Industrial, near where my parents used to live. And then the hospital was another 20, 30 minutes up the road. And so I just pulled on Peachtree Industrial, and she said, he passed away 5 minutes ago, before she got into the room. And so that stupid song was playing. And now whenever I hear that song, I just kind of laugh, because I'm like, of all the songs. We got up there, and he was very peaceful. Like, they had not covered him up. He was sleeping in the bed. I've always had this weird thing. I mean, anybody knows me. It's like, I've always had this weird fascination with death. Growing up in the South, ghosts and all the things that I write. I've also always been terrified of dead bodies for some weirdness. I mean, like, I worked on Crossing Jordan for years, and I would always go to the coroner's office every year that we got to go visit, because I was trying to, like, what's that when it's a form of therapy where they like make immersion therapy, I guess. So, I've been in many coroner's offices over the years just from the show, and I'm still completely unnerved by dead bodies. I don't like seeing them in caskets, but he was just very peaceful, and his hand was still warm. I mean, he'd only been dead for a few minutes, but it's like, that's one of those things that you never really think about. It's like the body really is still warm. And everybody arrived. We were there for about an hour, and I just wanted to get going, because it was like, I don't want to be hanging out with my father's dead body all morning long. We went and we made the arrangements. My mother wanted everybody cremated, so we had him cremated. And then we went to the cemetery and got the headstone and all of that picked out. And 4 hours later, that was it. And it was right before Christmas. And the funeral, my mother she didn't want a big funeral, I think because she didn't like the attention at that point. So it was a very private, we did a immediate family graveside. It was below freezing, and it was just miserable. But I remember my friend Kate came and she was standing next to me. At the end of it, he's in a little box. And she said, how are you doing? I just remember looking at her. I was like, this is the perfect button to the end of the worst year of my entire life. And it was great having people that I love show up at the visitation afterwards. We'd at the church, and I'd done a little video of him and pictures and stuff. And that night, I went home and I just started listening to every book on grief, podcast on grief. Anderson Cooper's got a great one. And I just sort of immersed myself in that. And it wasn't like I was trying to get over his death, because the thing was, I was lucky that I got to have 6.5, 7 weeks of landing that plane. Even when I was like, it's going to be fine, get up, move, eat, I think somewhere my soul was preparing me for it.
Do you feel like you were grieving before he died or was anxious?
So that's a great question, because like for years he just didn't move. He didn't walk. Like we just tried to get him to walk to the mailbox. It wasn't that he was lazy. He had congestive heart failure. And so he had a lot of fluid on his stomach. And so they'd have to draw that. And he had high blood pressure, diabetes. So it's like, I love him, but he just never took care of himself. For years, we were trying to get him to go to the little church gym that they go to and just walk on the treadmill. He just didn't it was not something that he was interested in. You try to get him to eat properly. And it's like, and I think even my mother was like, I'm just, let him live his life. He was 70, in his late 70s. And it wasn't, any dramatic changes in his lifestyle at that point were not going to guarantee him much more anyway. He led a very full, long life. But I think that Andy and I both were like, whenever we would go out to dinner or lunch, it would take him forever just to walk inside the restaurant. And we just wanted him to take care of himself. And you have to want it yourself. And there's nothing wrong with having that feeling. My feelings are very valid. Mm-hmm. Everybody's feelings around that are. And I think that so much, you could slip in as like, oh, why did I ever think that? Why did I feel awful that I feel that way, but my feelings are valid. And I just wanted him to have his best life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whatever, I feel like at the end of the day, whatever makes the person happy, you have to be happy with.
Yeah.
So I 100% agree with you on that.
And that the other part of that is like, I have a brother who's married and has 2 beautiful daughters, and he has a full-time job now. He was just ordained a few weeks ago. He's now the children's pastor at a big church up there, up street. And it's, as you and I both know, then there's us. Our job is make-believe. Mm-hmm. And our job has no stability. And so growing up, it was always kind of that. It was like, I don't think anybody in my family understands what I do and what my job is. They definitely don't understand casting. I feel like most of my life, I know that he was proud of me, but I know he never understood me. And that's just a fact of life. I think that was one of the hard things. It was like, there's nothing that I can do or say at this point that's going to explain myself anymore that makes it easier. And I think a lot of people that are in a creative field like that, unless they have that understanding, they have a parent who like grew up doing the same thing, it's hard to understand like what we do. It's hard to understand who we are. Mm-hmm. And, yes, they say they love us, but I don't think they understand us. And that's hard. That was the hardest part of this whole thing. The one thing that he said, the Monday before we had the palliative care conversation, Andy and I were there, and the thing that he said, he was scared for my mother. He said he was scared to leave her. And Andy and I were both like, well, please don't let that be the thing that you're holding on for. Like, we've got her. She's fine. Don't worry about that. But he said that he wanted me to find someone. And I was like, well, good luck with that. It's like, no, there's somebody out there for everybody. That's what he wanted for me. And that was his like last party, that and see y'all later. I was casting a movie in Richmond called Atlantis. Amanda, who was our publicist, we would have lunch together every day. And we were talking about my father at some point. And towards the end of my father's life, he would say these things that were very prophetic, like the last year. And Andy and I even mentioned, like, yeah, it's like it's almost like he's saying goodbye. I think my father knew that his days were numbered, or his years were at that point, towards the end of life. But the day before I left for Florida to do the show, I'd gone to the house, and as I was saying goodbye, he stands up and he very prophetically said, always remember who you are. And I was like, I know who I am. And he's like, well, never forget that. Never forget who you are. And in everything that I went through last year, that was the thing that it just, like the perfect button. Like that night of his funeral when I went home, worst year of my life. But I remembered who I was. And that, I think, more so has carried me all year long. I've had a great year. This has been a great year. Amanda had this necklace, this little thing made up for me. She said, always remember who the fuck you are. Oh, and I never wear a watch, and this is his Fitbit. And so this is like the Fitbit 2. It's so old. But the fun thing about this was I haven't worn a watch in 20 something years, but he wore this all the time. And so when I was doing Will Trent, I forgot to take this off. And so it was caught in one of the scenes. So one of the camera guys like put a piece of tape over the front of it. So the funny thing in all my death scene, it's like an ad for Fitbit. And then I got to wear it in English Teacher. It's made its rounds in the film and TV world. It's fun to have a little piece of him in the shows,
especially with him always identifying you as an actor.
Yeah. And he loved Will Trent, and so that was the other thing that was very sweet about them covering it up. It was that so we got to keep it. Yeah.
I love that. I do love that. Your father passing was the button to a shitty year for you. Yeah. And when my mom died, my year was going amazing.
Yeah.
I had booked like 12 things. Yeah. Literally like 3 things a month, constantly working. I woke up that day, I was going to read a book and do a meditation, and she died, and then the writer's strike happened.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of a shitty year for me.
Yeah.
Like the worst year of my life.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side.
Yeah.
I just feel like it took me a lot longer to find reason why to move forward. She died unexpectedly.
Yeah.
I had no closure.
Right.
With that woman.
Right.
So I'm glad he had some closing.
Yeah. No, it was, I think he knew, and in that last day, he goes, I think my days are numbered. And he said, and he asked Andy, he said, when did you think that I was not going to make it out of here? And Andy, God bless him, he's like the first day. And he's like, when did you, he goes, but he was like, yesterday. I was like, that's why I've been bad cop. That's why I've been an asshole the entire time. I was trying to get you up. I was trying to get you motivated. I said, yeah, I'm the kid that still believes in Santa Claus. Why are you not getting up? I was fighting for him until the end, which is, again, there's nothing wrong with my brother and my mother thinking that clearly they were right. But I guess, if you're the person at end of life, and unless you're like, this is it, let me go, I'll be fighting for you until the end. Mm-hmm. Or I will be the one that goes and gets the magic juice.
Yeah, I don't feel like our brains really comprehend it happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to Daniel the other day about my mom, and she was well aware by the doctors that she could have a stroke at any minute. But you don't realize the gravitas of that until you're dead or have a stroke, And I knew, too, she could have a stroke, but I also didn't realize what that meant. She didn't have a stroke.
Yeah.
But that her health was...
It was impacted by her choices.
Yeah. So I feel like our brains just want to hold on.
Yeah.
And as long as we can. We just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But now I'm hyper aware of how mortal I am.
Yeah.
Did that happen with you?
Yeah.
Or did you?
I have a brand new appreciation for life that I did not have at all in 2023. I definitely, there were a couple of times in 2023 where I just didn't even value it at all. It was a very dark place. But this year, it's like the individual who caused me great distress last year decided he was going to sue me for lots and lots of money for me being me. The day that I heard the banging on the door and I'm getting served, I get this gigantic document that thick, and I'm walking through the living room. 2 days later, I would have been on my way to Richmond. And I'm walking through, I'm like, what am I going to do? And I look out, and there's a little red bird sitting on the ledge. And he loved red birds. We gave little red bird pins at the visitation. When I saw that damn bird, I was like, okay, it's going to be fine. I just immediately was like, it's going to be fine. And it is. It's all been resolved. Couldn't prove shit. My appreciation of life has made me realize that I'm not what I think my credits are. Mm-hmm. And that was a big lesson. And more so just kind of living my purpose and what I am supposed to be doing. And not doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing.
And this happened after.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it was because, again, it was like at the beginning of the year, I was like, all right, well, let's try this acting thing. I was very lucky to, as the industry started to slowly come back here in Georgia, I got this great film to cast in Richmond, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But I got to work with great producers who every single day showed their appreciation of what I did, and a director who was a brilliant genius, and he was always showing his appreciation. But yeah, it was hard. It was really, really hard. But then I was working. Like I booked 2 shows before I left, and then I booked several after I've left, or since I got back, and I've got a new book coming out that I just finished up. And we've been having meetings about that as a series with some actresses. And so like things are good. Things are good. I'm excited about next year. But I think that with my father, especially now, it's like we're not worried about him anymore because he's no longer in pain. And he was in pain for a long time. He was not in a good place for a very long time. And I think, obviously when you lose a spouse, you're going to go through things. And my mother just dealt with breast cancer. And I think that my brother and I were there for her. She's a warrior. She didn't even do pain medication. She's like, I'll take a Tylenol. The woman had a mastectomy. She's like, she's fine with Tylenol. But she got to have her own little journey and her own little story talking about breast cancer and sharing that with her friends. And she's had friends who've gone through it. So they've all been very supportive of her. She's in a great place. And I think that if she was going to go through this while he was still alive, it would have been a different situation, because I think that he would have been so worried for her that I think that would have killed him, because he loved her so much. So, yeah.
Do you think, when you think of your dad, do you think, because there was a point he was mobile, do you grieve that version?
Yeah, I mean, I grieve all the versions.
All the versions?
Yeah. It's weird to not have the phone calls and text messages from him anymore. All he ever wanted, as your parents want to see you. Come up and see us, you never come see us. I'm like, and you're living your own life. You've got your own, you're trying to get your bills paid. And that's all your parents want, is just to see you and to be with you. And I wish that I had been more present. But at the same time, it's like life is going to happen one way or the other. And that I think that's the hardest part. I had a good father. It's like he sacrificed so much growing up for me to get into acting classes and running the concession stand at the children's theater where I did a lot of work. I think he always just wanted what was best for me. And I just wish that we had more in common that we could have shared. He loved television, but he was a man of very few interests. He loved my mother. He loved to travel. He loved to get in his little van and drive around, but he just didn't have, he put his attention on other people. That's what it was. The church, everybody at the church. I mean, he was, oh man, he was, I talk about the waitresses, he loved to harass people because he thought he was cute. That was just who he was. He loved to harass people. And the cousins of mine and family members, and he thought he was funny. He was never funny. But he thought he was funny. And that's all that's important. Mm-hmm. And people would write on his Facebook page how much they missed him, and how much, it's like, oh, he was your father was a wild man. I'm like, well, that's one way of putting it. Mm-hmm. And I do miss that. But the thing is, I still feel him around me. And that's not in sort of a weird ghostly way, but I feel like everything that I am and do is because of him. If that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, whenever you were talking about it, I was like, it would be, for me, it would feel like a waste if you didn't continue to do everything that you're doing, Yeah. I feel my mom sometimes too. I didn't tell you about her birthday last year. It sucked, but she was everywhere I went, because I spent the whole day doing things we would do together, going places she liked. And I went to this hole-in-the-wall restaurant she loved going to with her grandmother, but it's like 2 miles away from here.
Oh.
There's like 3 people in there, and it's like old Southern food, and her favorite band ever, Fleetwood Mac, and they played Landslide. That would never be playing here.
Yeah.
And so I started sobbing. But it was stuff like that the whole day.
Christmas sucked because it was... I mean, my Christmas sucked. My birthday sucked because he was in the hospital on my birthday, and I remember even kind of like he was kind of in and out of, I think, because of the medication they had him on. But my mother and I, we were going to go out to lunch for my birthday down across from the hospital. I remember kind of flippantly saying, like, "It's my birthday. Remember my birthday? And happy birthday to me." The year before my 50th birthday, I was working on that movie, and I flew back to be with them on my birthday, and I got to the airport. I'm at LAX, and my mother texted me, "We both have COVID." So I couldn't even see them. And so this year and next year have been about reclaiming birthdays, reclaiming holidays. I think we've had the conversation, like, I don't know that my mother will want to put up the Christmas tree this year. I personally can't wait. He had this one little redbird tree that he loved to put up. I don't think we put that up. I honestly can't remember if we put the tree up or not, because we were always at the hospital last year. There's always a tradition that we would go see a movie on Christmas. So we're going to do that. But I don't get weepy. And I think the reason is because he would not want that. That was the one thing that he was pretty clear about. I think because my brain was processing before I was, my soul was processing before all of us before I was. And of course, when you are landing that plane for 7 weeks, you are going through photographs, you are sort of reliving everything. I did have that going for me. And now this year, getting to be on set, which is, he loved watching TV, and getting to work in Virginia, and those moments where I find myself like walking down the street by myself. I love walking through Piedmont Park, and I'm like, I'm going to find the damn redbird. Sure enough, it'll be a redbird. I love that. I love looking for him everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that for you. I love that for you.
Yeah.
I cry all the time. Like, not all the time, but I definitely still have triggers. And it will be so random. How you said you miss getting phone calls and texts from your dad. The first time I booked something after the strike, it was a really good day, and I always used to call her on the way home, especially if it was like an hour away. I wanted to call her, and I couldn't. It was the first good day I had had since she died. And I was very mad I could not call her.
Yeah.
And then I got mad at her, and then I cried. Then I got mad at myself for getting mad at her. Yeah.
I think that being mad at them is a big thing, because I was so mad. But at the same time, it's like, what am I going to do?
Right.
It's like, I was mad that he hadn't taken care of himself. I was mad that he was in the hospital. I was mad that I was having to drive to the hospital. I was mad that he was in pain. I was mad that he was moaning. I was like, are you putting this on? Because again, I got my dramatic side from my father. So I'm like, are you really in pain? My mother at one point said, oh, he just starts moaning whenever I'm on the phone. Like, she'd be in the room. And so I'm like, yep, I can see that. I think also, and the other thing is that we have been so rewired during COVID, and I don't know how many people you've lost, but like Pat Murray was one of my best friends. We talked every single day. He was one of my first, he invested in all my early birthday cake and groom's cake and Project Phoenix, and he was so excited about, like, he saw the first cut of Undertaker's Wife and loved it, and he was so excited about everything that I did. This was first year 1 of COVID, and he lived in Palm Springs, and he had moved from LA to Palm Springs. And at one point, I left my car at his place to come back to Atlanta for like a month. And he called me and he said, I'm in the hospital. And I was like, oh God, that's horrible. Well, I'll see you in like a week, and then I'll, let me know if you let me pick you up anything. And he never left the hospital. We couldn't even say goodbye. And he didn't want to. He didn't want anybody in the room. He didn't want to talk to anybody. And then my friend Jen Jenkins passed away. And then while I was in Florida last year, my friend Kyle had called me, and she said, I have something I need to tell you. And so I called her, and she told me that she had dementia. We had a whole long conversation about it. Her mother is an actress who's going through that as well. And the next day she called me and she said, I have something I need to tell you. I have dementia. I was like, oh God. She didn't remember any of the conversation. And the thing that kills me the most is that at some point, I was too busy to respond to a phone call that she had texted me. She's like, I need you to call me. And I didn't call her back. And she died the next day. And it's these people that, Kyle was the first one to almost want to read every script and read every book. She was the first person to read Behind the Farm. And Jen Jenkins the same way. Anything I needed, Jen and I were on the board of the Atlanta Coalition of Theaters forever. I've known her more than half my life. And when we did Laramie Project, she's like, let me get you all like she was like always, those three were like my people. And so losing Jen and losing Pat, I think also kind of changed the way that I look at death and grief, because I grieved them for years. And so also going in with my father, it's like, it was a unique situation because of his health. Every time I'd see the phone ring, I was like, is this the call? Is this the call that he's dead? And getting that phone call, I mean, like, I'm at the gas station, getting ready to get on 95, start driving home. And when I saw my mother call, I'm like, oh God, this is it. And the thing was, they didn't call me. He had gone into the hospital before the show. So like I was at the theater. She's like, we didn't want to call and tell you before the show. So they waited until the next morning. And thank God they did, because I never would have slept. There was nothing I could do anyway.
It's not people, but one of our dogs recently passed, and I'm not really grieving him. And I miss him so much.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think because of my mom.
Yeah.
And King.
Yeah.
Because King was my child. Like, I had her almost 2 decades.
The fact that King went in such a wild way with your mom, too. I mean, it was...
Yeah, the last time I saw both of them was the same day. And I'm not grieving him at all, and he loved me more than King did. And he loved me so much, and whenever I think about him, I will get teary, but then I try to love our new puppy. Yeah. I've recently had an outlook that I'm very aware that time keeps moving. Yeah. And after my mom died, I did not even realize summer happened. Yeah. So I am also very aware of my mortality, and I'm like, so we are just going to try to do what makes us happy and feel it when it comes up, because I don't want to die that sad. And I feel like it really can consume you. It can ruin you or help you. Or not help you, but it can go one of two ways. Yeah. I feel like it's very easy to go the latter in my experience with it. So I'm just trying to change my point of view. And I think
it's so important not to blame yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to blame yourself for everything.
It is, especially when it first happens. Yeah. In my situation, I feel I could have done more. I could have done all the things. My higher self or my soul or whatever knows that I was doing the best I could with what I had, and it's not my fault. And we all make our own decisions, and we all handle things how we want to handle them. We choose to show up, make what out of each situation, and that was what she chose. Yep. But then I feel bad for saying that, So it's
just the way that it is.
It is, I know. And I don't blame myself as much as I did probably the first 8 months. She's been in my dreams, and I don't think she was in a good place when she died. Yeah. I don't think she was aware she died. Yeah. And I don't know if I've told you about the dreams. They were not good at the beginning. I believe the whole reason we're here is to learn and grow and not keep doing the same mistakes. So even if I do feel like I made mistakes there, I don't want to make them again. Yeah. And if I stay in that state, I am going to continue to make them. What is the biggest surprise or experience that you've had in your grief?
The biggest surprise, because as you talked about, when you lose a parent, it's the worst thing ever. And you going into life, you're going to be thinking, one day my parent's going to die, and it's going to undo me. After he died, right around Christmas, I started working on the second book, Behind the Farm, and I was also simultaneously working on my memoir. So I got to, in those first 2 months, before life got crazy with the other thing. I got to really sort of relive my entire childhood and teenage years writing about that, writing about all of my life. And that was a really cathartic. It was fun. It wasn't a weepy. I mean, sure, there were, obviously you get to certain triggers, but going through and writing about him and also sharing about him in videos, that was a really great way of celebrating him and also kind of honoring my grief and where I was at that place in time. That's what surprised me more than anything, is that I could feel him kind of around me. And also I have a family as well that's going through their process of it as well. But I was surprised that I remember telling you, it was like, I'm crushing grief.
Yeah,
like
you said that.
like I felt like I was, it was weird because I felt like I am very much doing the work. And that's what I remember thinking. It's like, I very much am doing the work. And I think that was what surprised me the most.
I feel like what surprised me the most is all the work I had done before my mom died completely vanished.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of felt betrayed by my belief systems.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I just knew everything I was doing was going to happen. My mom was going to be in my life during it all. And for her to just die, I was like, cool, so nothing is true. Nothing I believe. So that rewire, I'm rewiring again because I was not expecting that. So my soul is like, no, Libby, everything you believe is still like valid and true. So I'm getting back to that. But yeah, that was probably my biggest surprise. I was not ready for that. What would you say the biggest lesson you've learned from your grief and loss has been?
I think the biggest lesson that I learned is that I am finally an adult, if that makes any sense. When you have to make those decisions, or you're the one that's being looked to make those decisions, you can't hesitate. And you have to do what's in the best interest of your loved one and their experience. I think that the fact, as strong as I was, and that I didn't fall apart. I think also so much of that was the fact that he had told me, always remember who you are. And so I did know who I was. And more so in this past year, when I've had things that have like sort of unnerved me or someone pisses me off, I will defend myself. If you try to threaten me legally, I'm going to do what is right. And I'm not going to back down. Those lessons were like really what kind of catapulted me into this year and as I'm moving forward.
I feel like the biggest lesson I've learned is how I want to show up. Because I felt like I was showing up like that before my mom died, but then I completely stopped. I have really started to be aware that I don't want that to happen again. So I want to continue to show up and let the people I love know that I love them.
Yeah.
I feel like is really all that matters. How you make people feel.
Yeah.
I don't want my grief to hold me back from that.
Yeah.
I would like to use it to help me continue to do that.
Yeah.
Because we're going to die and we don't know when that will be.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to have anyone questioning where they stood with me.
Have you ever had a life-threatening experience that, like, this is it?
My gallbladder ruptured.
There you go.
And I flipped my Jeep.
Right.
A long time ago. My gallbladder ruptured. I was in so much pain, I was not in pain anymore.
Yeah.
So I actually had no clue how close to death I was until I woke up.
When I went through cancer, it was like that. There was like 2 days when I was like, this is it. I'm going to die. And at some point, I was like, well, no, this isn't it. And also, I can't allow myself to whine about it. I think it definitely unnerved my oncologist, because at one point I was hired a line producer on a documentary about breast cancer when I got cancer. I was like, did I catch it? Did it jump off a petri dish? So I remember as anybody who's gone through cancer understands, my mother's got great doctors. I mean, we're in and out. Like 9:30 is the appointment, 9:31 the doctor's walking through the door. That was not my experience with cancer in Los Angeles, because you go in, you're there for 3 hours, they finally come in, and I got shit to do. And so I remember at one point I was having to go through chemo, and he told me that my hair might not fall out. but that's what they tell everybody. And my hair absolutely should have fallen out. And so he came in, he saw me, and I had long hair at the time. And he goes, are you going to chemo? I said, you walked me across the room. Yes, I'm going to chemo. And I said, you said my hair might not fall out. He's like, no, your hair absolutely should have fallen out. I remember being on my phone, and he's like, could you please get off your phone? I said, I'm sorry, I'm just sending an email. He goes, I wish you would take this more seriously. You're acting as if cancer is just a major inconvenience for you. And I remember when he said that, I looked up at him and said, that's what it is. It's a major inconvenience for me. I think saying that out loud, it was like that was a new sort of hook that I had into it. I'm like, fuck cancer. It's just a major inconvenience. I never had the death thoughts at that point. I was like, this is...
Yeah, I feel like our thoughts really do.
Yeah.
We're very powerful, and we just don't
Yeah.
realize it sometimes.
Yeah.
Until stuff like that happens, and then you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I saved myself, possibly.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Chad, I love you.
I love you.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. You're one of my best friends. He's one of my best friends, and I love him.
You're one of mine. Love you.
I love you. Thank you so much for watching Lost and Found. I really hope that this episode resonated with you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe below. There will be new episodes every Friday, and grief is fucking hard, and you don't have to do it alone. And I love you, and I hope I see you next time.